Did you volunteer for the patrol boats with the intention of going to Vietnam?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That was the idea.
And was that primarily, an attraction that young men
Yeah.
commonly feel, an attraction to the adventure of war, the romance of war? Was there also, was there any political thing to it about we want to take it to the communists, or was it all
No,
just
I
like
don't.
an adventure?
That's a good question. I understand that the question, and I don't really think that had a lot to do with it because, um, and I know I'm being a little trite maybe or whatever, but we weren't the smartest folks in the crowd either. We wanted the adventure and we wanted to go out and be men in a hurry and have an option to be, or have an opportunity to be heroes and all that kind of stuff. And, but we didn't really, matter of fact, the majority of people that I ran with and knew pretty well didn't even know the whole story, what we were doing over there or what our function was. We just knew, there was a chance for adventure. So that's what everybody went out for pretty much. And we learned about the political end of it a little bit later after we got over there. It became a little bit more clear. But at the time, no, I don't think very many people knew that much about it. Being in armament and being in ordnance and stuff, we had a lot of interaction with people who were going to Vietnam or who had come back from Vietnam. And so we were all pretty well aware, the folks that I worked with and everything, we were all pretty well aware of the patrol boats, the PBRs, and what their function was. And, of course, there was a lot of legendary stuff floating around. And we did a lot of work with the SEAL teams even before I got to Vietnam because there was a lot of training and stuff going on. So we interacted with them quite a bit. And, of course, a lot of them in the SEAL teams did multiple tours with the boats in Vietnam. Their tours, the SEAL team tours, were 3 to 6 months, something like that. And they would go because they did multiple trips over, and so they didn't stay as long as we did. Our traditional tour was a year at first, and then every re-enlistment or every extension was 6 months. So,
right. Yeah. Now, did you volunteer for the patrol boats with the intention of going to Vietnam?
Yep. Yeah. That was the idea.
You mentioned the SEALs, and as part of your work there on these patrol boats in the Delta, you participate in a number of SEAL operations. My understanding is primarily getting the SEALs to where they need to get so that they can get off the boat into the jungle, picking them up, and then also providing fire support. But when you think about the SEALs and these operations you did with the SEALs, what are the things that come to mind so far as you know? And I know that the SEALs aren't going to tell you really in detail what they're doing, but so far as you could gather from just what you're observing, what were these SEAL teams doing that you were involved with?
Well, that's actually, we knew pretty well what they were doing and what the function, what the purpose of their operations were, because we were an integral part of what they were doing. So we had to know what their objectives were and how they were going to accomplish the objectives and so forth. Because we had to be in the right place at the right time to be able to support them as much as possible. But generally speaking, I'm get off the subject just a little bit, but I'll get back and answer your question. I got out of the service in '68, and I got back in during Desert Storm, late '80s, in the Army. This time in the Special Forces. So I stayed in to get my 20 years in the Army Special Forces. So I worked with the SEALs again during that time. In my later deployments, I spent a couple of years in Afghanistan during that process too. Working with the SEALs during that process, I realized that their operations were extremely technical and very involved and had a lot of rehearsing going on and so forth. So a single operation would take a good minimum of 2 to 3 weeks to get ready to implement and ready to go with. In contrast, in Vietnam, and getting more to your point and your question, they would come up with an operation one night sitting around a table drinking beer saying, why don't we go out and do this? And by 5 o'clock the next morning, they were ready to launch.
Wow.
So yeah, it was real. It's a completely different atmosphere. So again, they would be sitting around one night, and they did a lot of ambush assassination missions. They would take out certain integral Viet Cong, North Vietnamese operators, and the way they would do it is go out and set up in certain areas in the jungle, in an area where they knew this person was going to traverse at a certain time, and they just jump out and whack him, Yeah. And quick as that was over, they'd signal us to come back and pick them up, and we'd go back. But they'd be sitting around one night and come up with this operation, and they'd call us and say, hey, we're going to need you 5 o'clock in the morning and pick us up and insert us at certain coordinates. And, so we would get in on the operation at that point. So it was a really completely drastically different set of operations then.
As compared to Afghanistan, where there's a whole lot of planning and training.
Oh, yeah. A lot of planning and a lot of dress rehearsals and everything that would go on over there. And today, I think it's much, much more involved than that. So.
Sure. When you think about these SEALs that you're taking in and taking out of these operations in the Mekong, and understanding each SEAL is going to have his own personality. But when you look back on them, did they seem like they were, did they seem like they had kind of a collective personality that was distinguishable from others?
Yeah. Yeah, to an extent they did. And even today, the SEALs and most special operations people have a collective mindset. And again, just like you say, they are all individuals and so forth. But in Vietnam, the SEALs all the SEAL teams were to certain levels attached to the PBRs, because we would have whatever PBR group or section was over there, they'd always have at least one SEAL team attached to that section, because we were basically their wheels, to get them where they needed to go and pick them up and everything. So we were closely associated with them. So we got to know a lot of them. I think I told a story in the book about the one kid that was from Mississippi. One of the SEAL guys was from Mississippi. And of course, when you ran across somebody that lived close to where you came from, you developed a pretty good relationship with them, talking about home and so forth. So he and I got to be pretty good friends while he was there. And one night we took him out on an operation, and again, it was an assassination mission. They were going out to kill some tax collector or somebody going around getting money from people. And we took them in and dropped them off. And what we would do is they would come on the boats, and immediately, there'd usually be 6 of them, half a dozen of them would come on the boats, and they'd have all their gear. They'd have at least one local South Vietnamese with them, soldier with them. And they would just kind of drop to the deck and sit there quietly and out of the way while we did all of the work to get them where they needed to go. And once we got them there, we would, at a high speed, high enough that we could handle, we would hit the beach. Usually it was pretty thick with vines and stuff, so we would just kind of hit the deck or hit the beach as hard as we could to kind of drive through the vines to get the deck bow up as close as we could to hard ground. They would immediately jump off the front of the boat, and within 10 seconds, they would be completely off the boat. We would back up, we'd back up in the middle of the river and just sit there drifting until we got their signal to either give them support fire or come back and pick them up. Well, we knew where they were going to be from the coordinates. So we would set up our support fire, if we had to use it, to be either side of them, a distance and so forth. So they knew not to go into that area. We would back off and we'd sit there, and we generally knew about how long it was going to take for them to get their work done. And then as soon as we would hear some fire and so forth, and we'd get a signal if we needed to support them or not. But if not, we would just sit and wait. And then pretty soon we'd get the flashing lights from the beach, and we'd hit the beach right about the same area. They'd jump on board, go back to the back of the boat and drop, and we'd back off and head back home. Well, this one particular night, my friend came back on board, and he went to the back of the boat with the rest of them. We backed off, and we got heading back home. And while we were on the way back home, I went back to talk to him, see how everything went. And he had a big knot right in the middle of his forehead. I mean, it was like a big goose egg type thing.
Mm.
And he was kind of laughing about it. And I asked him what happened, and it turned out he got hit in the forehead with a grenade.
Wow.
And it was a homemade grenade. You know, the VC made their own grenades out of whatever they could come up with. And he got hit in the forehead and then dropped to his feet. And he said he was saying his prayers because he knew that was the end, and he didn't go off.
How often did you do operations with the SEALs? Would it be a weekly thing, a few times a week?
At least they would do at least one operation a week. And again, they didn't go over there with a set of objectives. When they got over there, they got a pass off from the team that they were relieving, and they picked up from there, and they started, going through intelligence reports and getting a lot of information from us. Because see, one of the things that we would do throughout our work was pick up people and interrogate them and get information that we could get. So whenever we got some valuable data or information from somebody, we'd pass it off to them. And if they wanted to do something with it, they would. And they would work up a little operation, and they would, it'd usually take more than 3 or 4 hours, but they'd sit down and go over a little operation with us, and then we'd launch. We'd hit the button and go.
Were these SEALs kind of independent operators? I mean, was there anybody who really controlled them, or were they free to kind of, manage their own affairs?
Yep, pretty much. They're very little, they were very closed off from the rest of the operation. Of course, there was required connections and so forth and combo back and forth between them and command, but if they wanted to do something, they just pretty much take off and do it. That was one thing that was kind of neat about Vietnam in a way, if you can use that terminology. In just about any area of Vietnam, and I'm sure a lot of your other vets have told you this, there's very little oversight. If you decided within your own little group, hey, wouldn't it be great if we did X? Nobody was going to tell you you can't do X or even ask you what X was, you just go out and do it. And if it was successful, somebody up the chain would claim credit for it. And if it was not successful, you just passed it off and went on and did Y or Z or whatever. So, but that was kind of fun in a way to have that freedom, have that flexibility. With the special ops people that were over there had the majority of that flexibility and that freedom to do stuff.
I wonder if that was what you're describing, kind of a fairly loose situation where soldiers and sailors can kind of come up with their own operations, almost a kind of a free-for-all thing. I wonder if that was especially true down in the Delta, just for reasons of, you're on all these canals, and it's just such a different feel from, say, up in I Corps.
Oh yeah, much different. It probably was a lot more loose, a lot more flexibility there too, for the reasons that you're mentioning. Because we were on the ground and we could see things that people in I Corps and especially back in the States and so forth couldn't see. So they kind of depended on little guys to come up with ideas for them. This might work here. This might work over here. The Ghost Patrol was about the stupidest idea anybody ever came up with. That was going around going out in the jungles at night, broadcasting ghost stories to drive people into the True Hoi program. The True Hoi program was where the VC could come in and give up.
Sure. And And
Go ahead.
the ghost stories are related to the Vietnamese belief that if someone has died, but the proper rituals haven't been performed over them, then their spirit
Exactly.
is sort of condemned to just sort of wander around. And is
Wander the
that what these
jungles.
ghost stories were about?
Yeah. And most of them had to do with, I had my linguist, of course, over there tell me what they were saying because I didn't speak Vietnamese, but most of them had to do with losing certain body parts. And so the victim would travel around the jungles at night looking for a replacement for the body parts that they lost. That they lost a head somewhere and they found a suitable replacement somewhere, they would take it. And they strongly believe that.
So your boat
And
is
those
going,
comments are kind of spooky at night too, a little bit just by themselves.
I can imagine. So your boat is going up the river and various canals with the speakers that are emitting these ghost stories.
Yeah, the old speakers like politicians used to put on top of their trucks to go around politicking back in the 30s and 40s, exactly those kind of speakers. And
And
we had the reel to reel tape recorders that would play the stories, and they were equipped with eerie music and just like a Hollywood production or something.
and the story might be there's a ghost of a NVA soldier who lost his arm in battle, and now that ghost is looking for an arm, and that arm might
They'd
be yours
always
unless
right,
you come to us.
and in the stories they'd always stay fairly close to the area where they were killed. So the story would be this guy was killed right here close to the area where we are right now.
Sure.
And of course, the objective would be there would be VC people posted out in the jungles at night to do various things. And the objective was to get them scared enough that they would go leave the jungles and go to the closest Chuhoi location and give themselves up just for the protection. So they were more afraid of that than they were of getting into combat somewhere, getting killed that way. But see, the negative outcome for us would be since we were doing these broadcasts like this, we would have to be idling as much as possible to keep the noise level down. And so we would have to be going as slow as possible through these canals. And the canals were the smallest parts of there was no way to get too far away from the bank where you couldn't be fired on. So the general outcome would be that the people who were hearing these stories were either going to go turn themselves in or they were going to get mad and,
And
shoot us. So,
Sure.
there's a lot of,
Yeah.
there's a lot of, got a lot of firefights doing those operations. So, but see, somebody just came up with that idea,
Right.
and there was so little at the top level. There was so little control of what was going on in Vietnam. Some little E4 would come up with this idea to do something like this, and the top people would say, "Yeah, sounds like a good idea. Let's try it."
I wanted to read a passage to you from your memoir. And then I'm just interested in what response you have as you hear your words read back to you. And what you're describing is kind of a combat scene, sort of a panoramic scene of what things look like post combat. Here's what you write: combat environments are amazing places for several reasons, but one of them is that they provide a hands on classroom in which the most vitally important of all life's lessons are taught and learned. A student in such a classroom can literally stand in one place, slowly rotate 360 degrees, and before he has returned to his original position, see a dead person, see a brutally slain dead person, have multiple near death experiences himself, be wounded, and develop a clear, unambiguous understanding of what it means to be willing to sacrifice your very life so that another person, often one you don't even know, might live on. Now, each of these experiences would be something that would be burned into the memory of a person in the normal course of a day. If you come across a body that's mangled in a car crash or something, if you see a dead person on the road, if you suddenly find yourself in a situation where you're putting your life at risk to save someone else who you don't really even know, each of those memories would be something that I think a typical person would remember and reflect on for a lifetime. But you're talking about having all of these, experiencing all of these things and others um, within the space of several minutes in the context of a firefight. So I'm wondering if you could just sort of reflect whatever it is that's going through your mind. I imagine as I read those words to you, you can bring to your mind's eye things you saw. You can put yourself right back there and see it again.
Yeah.
War as a classroom. War where I wrote this down, where the secrets of the universe are revealed. As I read those words to you, as you pull to your mind's eye these sights you had, what comes to your mind? What lessons do you learn? What are these secrets of the universe that combat reveals?
Well, and I appreciate you reading that. It sounds a whole lot better when somebody else reads it than it did when I wrote it, I think. But um, what I was trying to get across with that is that if you live a traditional life, you never go to the military, you never go into a combat situation, you may never see any of those things, or you may see one or maybe two of them, between the time you're a teenager and the time you're 60 years old. But in Vietnam, you have a really, really good chance of seeing those exact type things several times within a month period of time or less, depending on where you are. And you really don't even have to go anywhere to do it. You just stand in one place and you see it. So the traditional student in a classroom back here in the States, and as much as you've taught, you know how that works. They learn things in little bitty pieces over a long period of time. So it takes a long time for them to incorporate the theory of whatever. Well, in an environment like that, you learn it within completely, like a whole textbook, within 2 minutes. And you have to incorporate it quickly and not forget it. But just in case you do, you're going to see it again a couple of days from now. And you don't have to go anywhere to do it. You can just stand right there and watch, and you're going to see it. The answer, or the key to it, is what do you do about it? How do you respond to it? How do you reflect on it? And how do you incorporate it? And how do you make it to your benefit to survive, or whatever the case might be? So it's like a huge, highly impactful classroom. When I got back, when I was younger, and I'd talked to people who had never been in the military and never been to Vietnam or anything, the first thing not the first thing, but generally one of the first things they'd ask is, what is it like to kill somebody? Well, even today in my classrooms, when my students would talk about my experiences and my, places I've been, things that I've done and stuff, even today, occasionally a student will ask me that. And I generally just blow it off because you can't really tell anybody that. You can't really answer that question. But that was a common question. What is it like? And the reason they ask that is because they'll never experience it. It's one of those things they'll just never experience. So the closest thing they can do is to ask me what it's like. But over there, depending on where you were and stuff, what you were doing, you did it like on a routine basis. So, but even that, I'm thinking back on it now. I hadn't thought about this until just now. It's hard it's almost impossible, I guess, to tell somebody to answer that question. You know what I'm talking about. But over there, you knew exactly what it was like. You know, I mean, you couldn't put it in words, maybe, but you knew exactly what it was.
So it sounds like you're saying, when you write that, the world of war is a kind of a classroom, and the the secrets of the universe, or some of the secrets of the universe, are revealed. But it sounds like you're saying that you learn things in combat, in the world of war, the things you see, the things you experience. Um, you acquire a kind of knowledge, but it's a knowledge that's not really relatable to anyone who has never been in that world. So it's kind of a knowledge, but it's a knowledge that you share with other combat veterans. And I imagine
they know what you're,
yeah,
they know what you're talking about, and they know exactly what you're saying.
yeah.
But other people, you can never get that across to them. You can never explain that. It's like, just for instance, you might have done this with a pet, or one of your pets or something that died. But if it's a person and they've been wounded to the point they're not going to survive, and you're standing there with them, or you're touching them, or you're sitting down with them, or kneeling down beside them and trying to comfort them or something in some way, and you see them take that last breath, when they do it, hold on just a second. When they do that, it's like that transition in their body physically, you can't describe it. It's just, it goes from everything to nothing. I'm sorry.
No, and this is you saw this in Vietnam.
Yeah, it was, I'm sorry.
Well, let me ask this question. Not so that you've said that the question that folks have asked, that you've been asked this question over the years, what is it like to kill somebody? And I mean, I don't know how a person would even begin to answer that question. Let me try this question though. Um, how would you describe living with the memories of having done that? In other words, not what those memories are. And as the conversation goes, you do relate some stories that, if you're willing, I'd like to hear you tell these stories, but not so much what the memories are of the things that happen in the world of combat, but what do these memories feel like as you carry them, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
there's this idea related to the Vietnam War, the things they carry, that heavy pack, that those water canteens, all that ammunition, and I think some of the among the things Vietnam vets, combat vets carry are these memories. So just as you can describe what a pack feels like as it's weighing down on you, is it possible to describe what it feels like through the years to carry these memories, and also to know that there are very few people that you can actually share them with and know that that person will really understand what you're talking about?
Yeah. Um, you know, I've been real fortunate in a way over these years, because I've never really had the trauma. I know, right now, just thinking about it, but I don't think about that a lot. And I purposely didn't hang around a lot with Vietnam vets after I got out. I did originally for a short period of time every once in a while, and some of my real close buddies that I wrote about in the book, we got together periodically over the years. But they would spend every day with each other, or at least talk to each other every day. And I would go for 6 months to a year without talking to any of them. And I did that intentionally, because I just really didn't want to. There wasn't any reason to go back and talk about that stuff. I didn't get any, emotional benefit from it. I didn't get any, there was no reason for me to do it. So I didn't do it. And consequently, I didn't think about it a lot. There were a couple of incidents that are foremost in my mind, like the one I wrote about the people going down in the hole when I tossed the grenade in there. I thought off and on for years and years about those people, and wondering who they were, and wondering if they died or if they found a place to escape the force of the grenade before it went off. And
are you willing to share that story? The way you set it up and what you've written is I think if I remember right, you overheard a combatant sitting at a table and sort of reflecting on, I forget exactly, but something like, will we be forgiven for what we've done?
Yeah.
Young men thrown into the catastrophic world of war. And then you do relate that there's one story that you've reflected on, and you've just referred to it here. Are you willing to share that story?
Yeah, that's not a problem. I appreciate you asking about it. We were on patrol one day, and we took all of the sections, the river sections, had a 2-ship gunship operation attached to each one of the sections, a couple of Huey gunships. And when we got in trouble, I had some real problems, we could call in that, and we had that immediate fire support. So with this one particular day, we took a couple of sniper rounds from the beach. It was nothing, from the shore. There's nothing really, they didn't even get close to us because we were too far out in the river. But we just figured maybe the Hueys would like to get a little flight time. So we called in and asked if they wanted to come in and put a couple of rounds in the general area where we got the fire from. They said, sure. So they took off, and within a second, they had a couple of ships on site circling, and we could hear them talking on the radio, and they could hear us. We had that comm with them. So they swooped in 300-400 feet off the ground, put a couple of rockets in the general area, and then went back up, and we're circling. And all of a sudden, one of them, we were sitting there, we were drifting on the boats watching it. One of them's prop on the top of the aircraft started slowing. And at first I thought I was just seeing things, imagining it, but it got slower and slower, and it was probably 1,000 feet off the ground or so. And when it finally slowed down almost to a stop, the ship just fell out of the air. And it didn't flip over or anything. It just fell straight down. Now, the blade had, the chopper blade had stopped almost completely. And we heard them, the crew, talking. And the last thing the pilot said was, "Oh, shit." And about that time, they disappeared through the treetops, and it hit the ground. So, of course, we panicked, and we got on the radio and called command and said, can we go in and try to see if we can get anybody or help anybody? And they said, yeah, go. So we beached the boat, and 3 of us or 4 of us, I can't remember, grabbed some M16s and some ammo and a couple of grenades, no radios, and we jumped off the bow of the boat and went in the direction where we thought this chopper had landed. Well, that was our first mistake, because we weren't ground troops and we didn't know what we were doing out there. And we didn't take any radios with us. Mm-hmm. And I was wearing sandals. And as soon as I jumped off into the mud, mud sucked my sandals off my feet, so I was barefooted. So we were running through the jungle, and we went through within 100 yards or so, we went into the center of this little circle of thatched roof houses, and everybody was running different directions. Generally, when you got fire from a particular area, you could pretty well assume that the people in that area were pro-VC or pro-enemy. So as we were running through that village, we were seeing all of these people scattering and going different directions. And we assumed that they were pro-VC at least. Well, in front of me, there was 4 or 5 people ran into this entrance into an underground sort of a little bunker. And when I went by, I just pulled a pin on a grenade and threw it into the bunker behind them, and we just kept running. And a second or two later, the grenade went off. And ever since then, I've always wondered if I got this picture in my mind that there was 1 or 2 kids in that group. And I keep telling myself that there wasn't, that I'm just thinking that. But that's the incident that I was talking about. And that's the only kind of an incident really that I remember clearly or that remember on a routine basis.
Right.
You know?
And I don't imagine that you're, doing any, thinking things through in this situation. You're just running by. But to the extent that you had a thought, and I think there's probably a good chance you didn't actually have anything that would really be classified as a thought, is probably just more a response. But if you had anything like a thought, is it, these folks are probably VC, maybe they're going to shoot me from behind?
I told myself that. I told myself that, yeah. But we had gotten that drilled into us pretty much too. If you're in that kind of environment, everybody's fair game, because if you don't get them, they're going to get you. But I just keep thinking that there was a kid in there somewhere. But anyway, there's no solution to that. There's no real reason to even think about it that much, So,
and then as the story goes, a helo comes down and gets you, and
yeah, we got lost real quick. When we got to the other side of the village, all of a sudden we didn't know where we were. And this chopper came, the partner, the other chopper kept coming down to try to pick us up. And they were dropping flares, and we thought they were telling us to go towards the flare. But we found out later they were telling us that there was a VC where they were dropping the flare, not to go there. So we kept running in the direction where they were telling us not to run.
Okay.
And finally, this chopper just, to our benefit, just said the heck with it. He had to drop and get us. He dropped down in the middle of a lot of bamboo, pretty good bit of bamboo structures, and he was just chopping bamboo when he came in. And Gunner yelled yelled from the door, "Get your ass over here," telling us. So we were only about 30, 40 feet away from where he landed. So we all just ran to the chopper. Everybody jumped on board. I was the last one in, and he was lifting off as I jumped in. And I just grabbed a hold of one of these stanchions, and was holding on to it. And the guys were holding on to me. And when he lifted off, my legs were still dangling out the door. Wow. When he got up, 100 feet or so off the ground. But when he got up, we could look back down and we could see we were fixing to get overrun pretty good. So it was a stupid mistake for us to get in there to start off with. But of course, everybody on the chopper had died as soon as they impact.
The other chopper that had crashed.
The chopper that went down, yeah. They must have taken a round through the gears or something, some way, and jammed them up.
Yeah.
So,
and had that helo not come down and gotten you, you likely would have ended up a prisoner of the vehicle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we would have been killed pretty quick, I would imagine. But those guys were those were the real heroes over there, those chopper pilots.
I wanted to go back and ask you about something on a slightly lighter topic. And then maybe, if you're willing, come back and talk about the VC on the bridge. But, to kind of lighten up for a little bit here. You often hear about the Chuhoi program, and you mentioned it earlier. Is the rough translation open arms, I think? And
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and the idea is to encourage NVA and VC to switch sides. But your perception of the Chu Hoi program is that it wasn't very effective. What is it about the Chu Hoi program that you saw that made you think that maybe this isn't a very effective program?
Well, we learned it. When one of these guys came out of the jungle and went Chu Hoi, they just hold up their hands and say Chu Hoi, and we knew right off the bat what to do with them. They were treated like with kid gloves or whatever the whole time they were in the program. That was the enticement of it. You give up, you come in, we'll give you good food, a good place to sleep. We'll even run in some hookers once in a while, which some of the programs did to try to bump their numbers up. And you stay with us and you just give up for the rest of the war, you sit it out. Well, the idea was little by little, you chip away at the VC, the numbers and so forth. But just like most good old American government programs, the enemy should learn how to use it to their advantage. And what they would do is they would periodically have one or two of their people go on R&R, basically, to the Chu Hoi program. There were no fences around these places. They weren't like secured or locked down. They would just stay for a couple of weeks till they rested up, got some good food, and relax for a little bit. And then when their time was up, they just walk off and go back into the jungle, go back to the.
And
it worked that way.
Yeah, and this would be NVA and VC. They would just come up with their hands up.
They knew exactly what was going on.
2 or 3 week break in the program, get some good food, entertainment, and then they just disappear and likely back with the VC and the NVA.
I mean, from their standpoint, why would you not do that? Of course, that's not the way it was supposed to work, but that's the way it worked.
Right. I'm assuming in the Mekong, are you dealing primarily with Viet Cong? And is it a mix?
It was very few North Vietnamese regulars down in the South. But the majority of people that we were fighting against were reservists, more or less. You could call it that, or people that were just got thrown into the fight at a late date, and they were, they weren't like the real well-trained, well-equipped Viet Cong, So, but we did see some of those on occasion. We came in contact with some of those, mostly around Tet. When Tet hit, there was a good influx of high quality enemy in the area.
NVA came all the way down the trail, down to in the Mekong.
A good many of them did. Yeah, they got prepared, got set up for that operation before it ever happened.
Right.
So,
and you write about there was just kind of a feeling in the air when we get into. Maybe the second or third week of January, you could kind of feel that something was brewing before Tet. Is that right?
Yeah. And, the intel folks that we had, the higher up intel folks, the ones that work around Saigon, hung out around there pretty much, they knew something was going on from all of the intelligence they would get. We didn't have access to that kind of information. We were just, on the tail end of all that stuff. But even that, the tightness in the atmosphere around when you were talking to some of them or when you were around them, you knew something was going on.
How would you describe the intensity of Tet as compared to, just a typical week, if there was such a thing?
No comparison at all. I mean, it was so much. It was like night and day. We were actually on patrol the night. We were doing a night patrol the night Tet hit in our area. And we were on the Mekong doing operations. And Sadek was north of Bien Long. Bien Long was a larger city down south on the river. But if you were like halfway between, you could kind of see both horizons of where the cities were. When Tet hit Bien Long, Bien Long just lit up like an atomic bomb or something had gone off. It was just firefighting, rockets, mortars, everything going off and stuff. So we called back to SEDEC and said, Bin Long's under attack. Can we go down and assist them, or should we go down and help? And they said, no, you got to get back here because we're under attack too. So that's when we started motoring back north to SEDEC, and all the way back north, we were getting fire from the shore, and it just everything lit up. And I remember you could hear drums and bugles. And I always thought that was weird. I always thought I was imagining that until years later when I read about it and heard about it. The DC were using drums and bugles to communicate, not messages, but to signal.
Wow.
Different things to.
And could you tell, you were just saying that, most of the Viet Cong you're dealing with in the Delta are, reservists. They're not really well trained.
They weren't real well trained.
But when Tet hits, could you tell not only that the fire coming at you was more intense, but that the adversaries you were facing
coordinated,
were better coordinated, were better trained? You could tell all of that right away.
Oh yeah. The timing was much more finite with, in those type of operations. We were literally going 24 hours a day for about a week after Tet hit.
Wow.
Until things started slowing down because there was just something going on all the time. We couldn't relax during that period of time. The military started giving everybody, what Dexedrine is?
Yeah, kind of keep you awake. Yeah.
Yeah, they started giving that to everybody, and I remember the first night we got back to the base, like 3:00 in the morning or something, to re-equip, and we were going to try to grab some sleep, and they said no, as soon as you get re-equipped, you got to go back out again. But they said, take one of these pills and you'll feel better. Well, I took one, and about 30 minutes later, I still wasn't feeling any better. So I took another one. And then about an hour later, I took another one. And I think for about a week, my eyes were like that. So never had any more involvement with Dexedrine after that.
Did you have the feeling as Tet was unfolding that I've heard from a number of other vets who say that, and I think that, just the numbers that we know bear this out, that of course Tet was a failure. I mean, the goal was to cause an uprising in South Vietnam and end the war. Mm-hmm. And in terms of body count, it was a massive failure, I think, especially for the Viet Cong. But what you hear vets say is, Tet hit and it was a surprise, but when we hit back, we knew that we had devastated them, especially the Viet Cong. And I've heard even some vets say we assumed that this was the end of the war. I mean, because we took it to them with such ferocity after Tet, and they were obviously on their heels, and we thought the war was going to wrap up, which of course doesn't happen. Does that fit with your experience at all? Did it seem to you like after the initial hit, the VC were just getting decimated by the response?
Yeah, I kind of felt that way. We all did actually, but again, we were totally isolated from the atmosphere, the attitude of the whole rest of the world, or the rest of the American citizens and stuff. Anyway, we didn't know about the morale and how, the people were turning against the war, that kind of thing. We weren't given that information, and we didn't have any TVs, and we didn't have any, current information, newspapers or anything like that. So we thought, man, everything's good. We're winding down. We're winning. Everything's going great. We didn't realize what was going on back home. And actually, in actuality, the North basically won Tet. They lost a lot of people, but they won the frame of mind or the attitude or the will, shifted their direction.
You say this because of the psychological impact Tet had on the American population.
Yeah.
And the government. Yeah. But you did have that feeling, in the days after.
Yeah, we thought we were winning.
We're winning this thing.
Yeah, we did.
Wow.
We thought everything was going our way.
Usually, when you're operating your weapon, you're not shooting at people. You're shooting into the jungle where fire's
Yeah.
coming from.
Yeah.
And there's a certain relief in that because you don't know if any of the bullets, the weapon you're shooting
Yeah.
fired, hit any of those people.
Mhm.
But there is one incident that you described where there is no ambiguity, and it has to do with the VC guy on the bridge. Are you willing to share that story?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. There's always, not always, but 90% of the time when a young person's in combat, and I think it was probably that way during World War II and maybe Korea too, but when they don't actually see the people that they killed, they just think that they probably killed a few people here or there. They don't actually see that. But the first time you ever do see that, the first time you actually observe it and you're that close to it and you know that you did that, what's going on around you at that time, or who the people are around you at that time, sort of dictates how you're going to deal with that for the rest of your life, really. And I was lucky because the people that were around me recognized what I was going through and what I was thinking. And they sort of set me up for success with that idea, that feeling for the rest of my life, really. But if you're in by yourself or in a bad situation, that could really screw you up for a long time. But we were actually on a quiet patrol. We were observing. We were going up this river, this canal, because there had been some sightings of some DC flags in the area, and we were trying to go up through there, just move out and draw fire type thing. That's sort of what we were doing. So we had gone up this canal and we had cut our engines. We were drifting backwards, back down through the canal. When we went past this canal, it sort of ran off on the right angle from us. When we first got in view of the canal, it just shot straight off to the right, about 90 degrees. Just right about 15, 20 yards or so down there was a bridge, a walk bridge across there. And there was a VC flag on at the time, but there wasn't anybody around. So we just kept on going up. But when we drifted back, I was on the aft gun. So I was the first one to come in the side of that bridge when we actually came inside of it. And it was a real hot day. Everybody was tired and drowsy and sleepy. And I was on the back gun trying to stay alert and stuff. When I first came inside of it, I looked and there was a young guy, VC, just about in the center of the bridge, right below that flag, with a AK, just looking at the water, or he was probably as drowsy as I was. And as soon as I saw him, I opened up on him and killed him, knocked him off the back of the bridge when he got hit. He was trying to run off the bridge, and I got him before he got to the edge of the bridge, and he just flipped backwards off the back of the bridge when I hit him. And at first it didn't, everybody opened up then, and we fired up the engines and got out. And at first I didn't think about it, but not long after that, just when we got out in the middle of the river, I started realizing I just killed that guy. And my buddies around me, came back and we talked. And so it was just, one of those experiences, the first time type thing. And
You say in what what you've written, if I remember right, that, and I won't ask you the name, but that you have given him a name, that you've given this young Viet Cong guy a name. Is that right?
Metaphorically in the book, I was talking about how occasionally when I'm thinking about it, I kind of talk to him, just musing, just a little metaphorically. And I was trying to describe that in the book.
Mm, yeah. I want to just read something. You say, as close as we were, I could easily see his eyes widen for a moment, then suddenly take on a look of resignation and sadness. He smiled slightly as if to say, okay, you got me. I should have been alert. Um, as I read those words, I imagine you can see him. There he is.
Yeah, I do every once in a while. It's not a real bad feeling or anything, though. It's kind of a sad feeling in a way, but because he was probably a lot like me. We were probably close to the same age, pretty much, and he might have been standing up there thinking about his girlfriend or something,
Mm.
you know. So
The very last sentence of your memoir. Now, in this case, you're talking about the Navy guys you served with. So you're referring to them. You say, "We will meet again in the mansions of our Lord." And, a couple of them had passed away when you'd written that, and we'll meet
yeah,
again in the mansions of our Lord. For the sake of discussion, let's say that you meet this kid in the mansions of the Lord, and you have a chance to have a short discussion. What do you suppose you might say to him?
well, I probably wouldn't say I was sorry because he would understand. Um, I'd probably talk about what he was feeling at the time, what he was thinking at the time. If I was right about him saying or thinking, "Okay, you got me," um, we'd probably talk just matter of factly. I don't think there'd be any real emotion, or he wouldn't be mad at me, or I wouldn't be scared of him or anything like that. It would just be kind of like running across an old friend you hadn't seen for a long time. So
Mm.
I think,
I mean, it's interesting you say he would understand because, of course, things could easily have been flipped around. He could
oh
have,
yeah,
he could have had a
definitely,
3-second advantage on you.
very
Um,
definitely.
and just the image I have in my mind is of young men who have just their paths have crossed, and they've both been thrown into the disastrous world of war. And here they
Bad
are.
situation. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We all of the times I've ever been involved in combat situations, I've always known that the people that I was charged with trying to kill were not a whole lot different from me. They might believe different things, but 9 out of 10 times they probably wouldn't know any more than I did about what I was doing there.
We've said some things about the awfulness of war and the horribleness of it, but it comes up in what you've written, and I've heard plenty of other combat vets talk about it as well, as combat as kind of a drug also that can almost become addictive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Very
so it's
much so.
this incredible paradox of something that's awful and awesome at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any feeling a human being goes through that is out of the ordinary, whether it's fear or whether it's excitement or love or whatever, they want to repeat it because it takes them out of here and raises them up to here for a short period of time. Well, war is exactly that. So even though it's scary and frightening and everything else, it takes you out of the ordinary and it takes you someplace where you don't get a chance to go very often. So if you have an opportunity to repeat it, it's just like a drug, like any other type of drug. And of course, if you have a little propensity to be dependent anyway, um, you might want that experience repeated over and over again. So I had a lot of friends that kept going back until they died.